What's going on? YouTube. Listen up, young elder gang. This is Shoeshine Joe at you with another banger. Please make sure you like, subscribe, and share this video. Fam, I hope this video get at least 100,000 likes in this video. You will find history definitions, scripture information, and best of all, what we Americans have been deprived of from the beginning. The truth, keep in mind this. Content used in this video is intended for entertainment, educational, and informational purposes only. We will give you the total truth as we best understand it today. Be sure to hit that like button. Young elder gang, hit that subscribe button if you're new to the channel, hit that bell, and don't forget to check back with us every day for new content. Imagine a nation within a nation. That's the essence of tribal sovereignty. Long before the United States, hundreds of Native American tribes governed themselves with their own laws, leaders, and cultures. When European colonizers arrived, they made treaties with these tribes, agreements between independent governments recognizing their sovereignty. Tribal sovereignty means tribes have the inherent right to govern their people and lands. It's not a privilege granted by the U.S., but a right that predates it. Reservations aren't just land set aside. They're homelands where tribal governments operate, providing services like schools, hospitals, and police. Today, nearly 600 federally recognized tribes exercise this power, preserving their way of life and shaping their own futures. The U.S. Constitution recognizes tribes as distinct political entities, and early Supreme Court cases like Worcester v. Georgia affirmed this status. Chief Justice John Marshall called tribes distinct political communities with exclusive authority within their boundaries. While legal recognition has been challenged, the core principle remains: sovereignty is the right to self-determination. For Native communities, sovereignty is the power to teach their language, protect sacred sites, and create laws reflecting their values. It's a daily struggle to have this right fully honored by federal and state governments. Understanding tribal sovereignty is key to understanding the complex relationship between the U.S. and its First Peoples. It's a story of resilience and the enduring power of self-determination. Sovereignty is not just a legal term, it's the foundation of Native identity and survival. It's about making choices for their own communities, on their own terms. Despite challenges, tribes continue to assert their rights and protect their heritage. Their governments are vital, not relics of the past, but living institutions. The fight for sovereignty is ongoing, shaping the future for generations. Recognizing this is the first step toward justice and respect. Tribal sovereignty is a testament to the strength and resilience of Native nations. Historically, federal Indian policy has fluctuated, with periods focused on forced removal, assimilation, and termination of tribal status. These policies often disregarded Native laws, customs, and sovereignty, leaving a legacy of mistrust and systemic challenges. The General Allotment Act of 1887, aimed at dissolving communal land holdings and forcing assimilation, resulted in the loss of vast amounts of tribal land. The Indian Appropriations Act of 1871 ended formal treaty-making with tribes, shifting the relationship to one governed by statutes, which some argue weakened tribal sovereignty. While the Supreme Court has recognized tribal sovereignty, it has also issued rulings that some interpret as limiting tribal powers and rights, especially in cases involving jurisdiction over non-members or non-Indian lands within reservations. The concept of tribes as domestic dependent nations, established in Cherokee Nation v. Georgia, while recognizing some sovereignty, also implies a dependency on federal authority. Critics argue this framework has sometimes been used to justify federal control over tribal affairs. In cases like Talton v. Mays, the Supreme Court has held that the Bill of Rights does not apply to tribal governments in the same way it applies to federal or state governments, potentially impacting individual indigenous rights within tribal legal systems. Tribal governments often face a chronic shortage of resources and technical assistance to effectively administer their justice systems. Complex and sometimes overlapping jurisdictional boundaries between federal, state, and tribal authorities can create confusion and challenges in law enforcement and the protection of indigenous rights. Congressional limitations on tribal court sentencing authority, for instance, can hinder tribal governments' ability to address crime effectively within their communities. The Supreme Court has issued numerous rulings over time, some that uphold and some that arguably limit indigenous rights. Tribal courts interpret and apply tribal law, and in some areas, Federal law recognizes the primary role of tribal courts in matters of tribal law. In summary, the federal courts sometimes fail to adequately protect indigenous rights as a result of a combination of historical injustices, specific judicial rulings, and ongoing practical challenges in navigating complex legal and governmental structures. Native American chiefs are leaders chosen by their tribes. They guide their communities, protect traditions, and speak for their people. Chiefs are respected and often help solve problems within their tribes. Sometimes they also work closely with the United States government, but even chiefs can get into legal trouble. Some have been arrested and sent to federal prison. This can happen if the government believes they broke a federal law. Sometimes the federal government does not see or respect tribal laws. This can cause chiefs to be punished unfairly. One reason for this problem is confusion about who has the right to make and enforce laws on tribal land. The United States has a long history of making decisions for tribes, even when tribes disagree. This can lead to mistakes or unfair treatment. When a Native American chief is put in federal prison, many people ask if their sovereignty, their tribe's right to govern itself, was respected. The answer is not always simple, but understanding sovereignty is the first step. Native American chiefs have been considered political prisoners in the U.S. for various reasons, often tied to conflicts and resistance against U.S. government policies and actions. During the Indian Wars, many Native American leaders, including chiefs, were imprisoned as prisoners of war or criminals due to their involvement in resisting U.S. westward expansion and attempts to remove them from their lands. Resistance to forced removal, such as the Cherokee Nation's struggle against the Trail of Tears, resulted in the imprisonment of some leaders who opposed treaties and government actions. Leaders of Native American rights movements, like the American Indian Movement, AM, have faced imprisonment and accusations of being political prisoners due to their activism, advocacy for tribal self-determination, and efforts to address historical injustices. A political prisoner is someone imprisoned for their political activity. The political offense is not always the official reason for the prisoner's detention. Political prisoner is a person accused or convicted of an ordinary crime committed in a political context, such as at a demonstration by a trade union or a peasants' organization. A member or suspected member of an armed opposition group who has been charged with treason or subversion. Dr. York is a political prisoner. Leonard Peltier, a Native American activist and member of the American Indian Movement, is a prominent example of a Native American considered a political prisoner by many. Controversial conviction. He was convicted of the murders of 2 FBI agents during a shootout on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in 1975. But his supporters maintain that the trial was flawed and influenced by political factors. The FBI's involvement and alleged irregularities in his extradition and trial have fueled the belief that he was unjustly imprisoned for his activism. In 2025, President Biden commuted Peltier's life sentence, allowing his release to home confinement. The Freedom Archives lists other cases of Native Americans considered political prisoners, such as Norma Jean Croy and Patrick Hootie Croy. The case of Crow Dog, a Sioux man who killed another tribal member and faced federal charges despite his tribe's own justice system, highlights the U.S. government's disregard for tribal sovereignty and potential for conflict, leading to the imprisonment of Native Americans. Imprisonment of Native American leaders and activists is often seen as a result of their resistance to historical injustices, including land dispossession, treaty violations, and attempts to suppress their culture and way of life. The actions of the FBI against organizations like AIM, which was subjected to surveillance and repression, have contributed to the perception that activists like Peltier were targeted for their political beliefs and actions. The disproportionate incarceration rates of Native Americans in the U.S. further fuels concerns about systemic injustice and the potential for political motivations in their imprisonment. It is important to note that the term political prisoner is often debated and can be interpreted differently. However, the cases of Native American chiefs and activists, particularly those associated with the American Indian Movement, raise serious questions about the role of the U.S. government in silencing dissent and limiting the rights of indigenous people. Tribal sovereignty is the right of Native American tribes to govern themselves. This means tribes can make their own rules and solve their own problems. Tribal sovereignty comes from the history, culture, and treaties between tribes and the United States government. Tribal sovereignty is kind of like a country's independence, but with limits. Tribes can decide many things for their people. They run their own schools, courts, and police. But there are times when the federal government steps in and takes control. The United States government promised to respect tribal sovereignty in many treaties. These promises are like contracts. But there have been many times when the government broke these promises. This can cause confusion about who should have the final say. If a chief's sovereignty is overlooked, it means the tribe's right to handle its own affairs was ignored. This is not only unfair, but it can also be against the law. To fix this, people need to understand and protect tribal sovereignty. Tribal sovereignty is real, but it's not absolute. Congress and federal courts have imposed major limits, creating a confusing legal landscape. The federal government holds plenary power over Indian affairs, meaning Congress can override tribal laws at any time. Supreme Court cases like Oliphant versus Suquamish stripped tribes of criminal jurisdiction over non-Indians on tribal land, leaving gaps in justice and safety. The Major Crimes Act gives federal courts authority over serious crimes by Native Americans on tribal lands, taking away a core function of tribal government. This patchwork of tribal, federal, and sometimes state jurisdiction often leads to confusion and injustice. The struggle for tribes is not just to exercise their rights, but to defend them from further erosion. Tribal courts are not just replicas of American courts. They're rooted in unique philosophies of justice. Many tribal systems focus on restorative justice, aiming to heal rather than punish. Instead of a witness stand, you might see a talking circle, where victims, offenders, and elders discuss the impact of a crime. Sentences often involve community service, traditional ceremonies, or treatment programs, tailored to repair harm and restore balance. Justice is about reintegrating individuals, not isolating them. This approach addresses root causes like trauma or addiction, strengthening the whole community. Each tribe's court reflects its own culture, but the common thread is justice as healing. Tribal courts offer a powerful alternative to punitive systems, focusing on making communities whole. It's a vision of justice that prioritizes restoration over retribution. Federal law and tribal law are two sets of rules. Sometimes they match, but other times they clash. Usually, tribal law handles problems that happen within the tribe. Tribal police and courts deal with these issues using their own traditions and rules. But the federal government says it can step in for certain crimes. This comes from laws like the Major Crimes Act. This law gives the federal government power over some serious crimes if they happen on tribal land. This can be confusing and honestly even unfair. For example, if a chief is accused of a serious crime, both federal and tribal courts may want to handle the case. This creates a jurisdiction problem. Who really has authority? Sometimes United States courts make decisions without asking the tribe. This can ignore tribal sovereignty. Many tribes and legal experts think the federal government should respect tribal courts more. They believe that if a chief is accused, the tribe should decide what happens. Federal courts should only get involved when the law clearly says so. Tribes are not passive. They fight for their rights using every tool available. Legal challenges have protected land, water, and treaty rights, as seen in landmark cases like the Bolt decision. The Indian Civil Rights Act extended key protections, allowing individuals to challenge tribal court decisions in federal court. While this act provides safeguards, it also imposed federal standards on tribal governments, complicating sovereignty. Tribes also use political advocacy and protest, like the Standing Rock Sioux's fight against the Dakota Access Pipeline, to defend their rights. These efforts show that sovereignty is a living movement, not just a legal concept. Through courts, activism, and organizing, tribes demand justice and accountability. Their resilience keeps the fight for sovereignty alive. The struggle is ongoing, but tribes continue to speak truth to power. When a chief is sent to federal prison, tribal governments and legal experts often team up. They review the case to see if the chief's rights were ignored. Lawyers look for mistakes, like federal courts not respecting tribal laws. Tribal leaders can write letters and file legal papers. They ask judges to review the case. Sometimes they gather evidence that shows the tribe should have handled the problem. In some cases, they ask for a new trial in tribal court. There are real examples of this teamwork. In the case of Leonard Peltier, a Native American activist, many believe he did not get a fair trial. Groups like the Native American Rights Fund and tribal councils have asked for his release. They say his sovereignty and rights were not respected. Working together is important. Lawyers, tribal governments, and even outside groups use court cases, protests, and news stories to raise awareness. This teamwork can help chiefs get a fair chance at justice. Tribal courts are special. They use tribal laws and culture to solve problems. These courts know the people and understand traditions. This makes their decisions fairer and more meaningful for tribal members. Restorative justice is another important idea. Instead of just punishing someone, restorative justice looks for ways to heal the community. It brings together the person who did wrong, the person hurt, and the community. The goal is to repair harm, not just give out punishment. Sometimes international law can help Native American chiefs. Groups like the United Nations have rules that protect indigenous rights. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples says tribes have the right to govern themselves. Sometimes tribes use these rules to pressure the United States to do the right thing. In the end, freeing a Native American chief is about respecting tribal sovereignty, using fair legal processes, and working together. It takes effort from tribal courts, legal experts, and even international support to make sure justice is done. The federal government has interacted with Native American chiefs and tribes in complex ways throughout history, often marked by conflict and attempts to assert dominance, but also by evolving recognition of tribal sovereignty and self-governance. Initially, the relationship was largely shaped by westward expansion and the desire for land, leading to treaties, removals, and conflicts. Later, the concept of a federal trust responsibility emerged, obligating the government to protect tribal interests. Though this responsibility has been inconsistently applied, the primary driver of early federal interactions was the acquisition of Native American lands to accommodate westward expansion. The federal government engaged in treaty-making with tribes, often resulting in the forced removal of tribes from their ancestral lands. For example, the Trail of Tears. Conflicts arose as tribes resisted the encroachment on their lands, leading to wars and military actions. The federal government developed a trust responsibility towards tribes, recognizing a moral and legal obligation to protect their well-being, lands, and resources. While acknowledging tribal sovereignty, the federal government also asserted its own authority over tribal affairs, often through legislation and policies that impacted tribal governance. The process of federal acknowledgement or recognition is crucial for tribes to access certain federal benefits, services, and protections. The current relationship is described as a government-to-government relationship, emphasizing the importance of consultation and cooperation between the federal government and tribal governments. Despite progress, challenges remain in ensuring tribal sovereignty, protecting tribal lands and resources, and addressing historical injustices. The Supreme Court has affirmed the federal government's plenary power over Native American tribes, meaning it has broad authority to legislate on tribal matters. The Supreme Court has also recognized tribes as domestic dependent nations, acknowledging their inherent sovereignty while recognizing the federal government's ultimate authority. This policy, which existed in the mid-20th century, aimed to terminate the federal trust relationship with some tribes, leading to the loss of tribal lands and resources. The Office of Federal Acknowledgement, OFA, within the Bureau of Indian Affairs, BIA.gov, is responsible for reviewing and making decisions on tribal petitions for federal recognition, a process that involves demonstrating historical continuity, social cohesion, and political influence. The interaction between the federal government and Native American chiefs and tribes is a complex and evolving story with a history of both conflict and cooperation. Understanding the historical context, legal principles, and evolving policies is crucial for appreciating the ongoing relationship between the two entities, according to the Center for the Study of Federalism. The story of Dr. Malachi Z. York E.L., or Chief Black Eagle, highlights the intersection of race, religion, and justice. In the 1990s, he led the Yamasee Nubian nation of Moors in Georgia, building a community rooted in Native, African, and Islamic traditions. The community drew scrutiny, and in 2002, Dr. York was set up, kidnapped, and slapped with serious federal crimes. Supporters argue he was denied a fair trial, citing issues with legal representation, alleged coercion, and mishandled evidence. He was sentenced to 135 years in prison, a punishment his followers see as political persecution. They know the charges were exaggerated to dismantle a Moorish-led sovereign community. The case raises questions. Was Dr. York judged on evidence or targeted for his beliefs in leadership? His family and supporters see his trial as a modern example of the justice system silencing those who challenge the status quo. Whether seen as a prophet or just a regular guy, his story is a powerful case study in the struggle for fair justice. It underscores the ongoing fight for self-determination and the risks faced by leaders of Native Americans. The International Court of Justice, ICJ, is generally considered the highest court in the world. It's the principal judicial organ of the United Nations and handles disputes between nations, while the ICJ resolves international legal disputes. Dr. York's case echoes a long history of targeting Black and Native leaders who challenged the system. From Sitting Bull to Martin Luther King Jr., powerful leaders have faced surveillance, discrediting, and even violence. The FBI's COINTELPRO program targeted groups like the Black Panthers and the American Indian movement, using infiltration and false rumors to destroy movements. Leaders like Fred Hampton were killed, and others like Leonard Peltier remain imprisoned after controversial trials. Supporters see Dr. York's prosecution as part of this legacy, demonizing leaders and dismantling their communities. The goal is often to break the movement, not just the individual. This history fuels deep mistrust of the justice system among communities of Native Americans. The fight for Dr. York's freedom is part of a larger struggle to expose these patterns and demand true justice. Recognizing this legacy is essential to healing and reform. The fight for Dr. York's freedom continues, driven by a global movement seeking justice and reform. His supporters work to highlight alleged injustices, believing that change for one can spark change for many. This struggle is tied to broader movements for Indigenous rights and racial justice. Respecting tribal sovereignty means empowering tribes to govern, protect, and revitalize their communities. Real change requires legal reform and public education about sovereignty and systemic injustice. Every act of solidarity helps build a more just society. The resilience of Native communities and activists is a force for hope. The fight for one person's freedom becomes a fight for justice, dignity, and the soul of a nation.